Thank you. I hadn't prepared a presentation for this segment because I was expecting a question-answer session, which as soon as I stop talking, you get the chance to put questions. I wanted to emphasize, though, 3 or 4 basic points which emerged from the Working Party meetings. We were a bunch of people with very disparate backgrounds. If you can imagine 3 or 4 people who are the opposite of me, and we happily coexisted and came up with a series of recommendations. That means that our thought processes, once we'd shared them, were relatively robust. So I'd just like to dwell on 3 or 4 common themes that emerged from very, very different points of departure. The first is that there was nobody in our group who was commending a return to the past. Nobody was advocating or thought sensible to dream of returning to massive government intervention in commodity markets. So that means that you can discount about 75% of the press articles you were reading 2 years ago. It helps if you're really studying rather intractable problems. Since none of us had any responsibility for taking decisions, professors don't usually take decisions, senior civil servants don't take decisions, politicians sometimes take decisions if they can agree between themselves. We wanted to dwell on the things where we thought more could be done, which one might call intervention. Intervention in CAP terms does not mean going out and buying 5 tons of butter. Intervention means doing something, intervening. Well, the first and most important weakness, which we all identified, is the lack of market transparency. Your example on sugar means that we must all agree you get speculative bubbles. Most people do not believe that there is a link between what happens at the farm and what happens in the supermarket. It is so diffused. So if public authorities were to invest more time and money in ensuring greater market transparency within the EU and globally, this would help dampen down certain extremes of prices. Certainly would taper off surges in prices. If only we could have persuaded people a few years ago that the world was not about to run out of rice, we would not have seen export restrictions placed on rice, and we would not have seen the very high rice prices that prevailed, which didn't affect us as European consumers because we can afford to pay. But it certainly adversely affected developing countries which relied on imports of a staple, rice. And it's no secret to anybody, we will see a surge in rice prices in the next few months. It's obvious, isn't it? Just you were watching the news last week. A significant proportion of Japan's rice production, for a variety of reasons, and they are rich, so they are going to go out and they're going to buy rice. That's going to lead to a price surge, despite the fact that it has a minuscule impact on the world balance sheet for rice. Then, once you've got market transparency, what are you going to do with it? Well, firstly, you're protecting farmers in the sense that they know what they could get for their product. So, price transparency helps farmers stabilize the types of prices they might get, because if there's a surge in prices, then a large number of farmers will suddenly offer stuff that they didn't realize was so valuable. On the other hand, if prices fall, they will know that there are some transactions taking place at higher prices. So the peaks and the troughs are attenuated by market transparency. One other important thing which we felt is in the conclusions, but you have to read the body of the report. State aids, competition rules, are currently interpreted by many member states differently from one another, which is unfair for the farmers in one society or another. We still have member states, so it's unreasonable if competition law is interpreted differently between different member states. On the other hand, an example of where perhaps the Commission, my former employer, so now I can say what I like, should have some more work because they don't have enough work to do, is to ensure that the Commission has full reserve powers to deal with the unexpected. So there is some nice polite language in here that talks about it, but I'd just like you to dwell on the example of the price collapse of a few years ago. Nobody expected that the consumers of poultry in one corner of Europe would decide to stop buying it. It was only in one corner of Europe that the avian flu scare, illness, epidemic, whatever you want to call it, led to a collapse in the consumption of poultry. That was totally unexpected. There was no provision in the legislation. Despite the cooperation of the European Parliament, it took several months before the supporting instrument could be deployed. By the time the money was there to hand over to the farmers to alleviate what was a crisis situation in some quarters of Europe, the problem was over, some people had gone bust, and as a result, only half of the money that was allocated was used by the farmers, simply because the decision-making process was too cumbersome. So we appeal for safety net mechanisms, full discretion for the Commission, and member states can supervise them in a management committee. I think that's really all the points that I wanted to dwell on, except the obvious one where I have to agree with my former colleague. It's all about making sure that market signals do get through to farmers. We want to attenuate extreme reactions, but we do want the market signals to get through. For those of you who are students of statistics, it's very revealing to look at the demographic statistics of farming since 1960 in Western Europe and in Central Europe. Some of the new member states have a long way to go in the structural adjustment simply because farmers in that sort of environment cannot become competitive unless some of their neighbors abandon farming. Small farms are unlikely to be competitive and sustainable in the longer term. So there's a process of structural adjustment which is going on, and one doesn't want to mask the economic signals which will ensure that those who are best placed to continue farming in the longer term are able to do so, but that means a massive structural adjustment. The figures for Greece in the 1960s were staggering. I think it was something like 1.5 million farmers left the land in less than 20 years. That was in one member state. So there's a process of structural adjustment going on, and rural development policy is the way to try and stimulate improvements in innovation and productivity. Thank you.